The sun was falling behind the distant hills, painting the sky in gold and rose. Eli Turner rode his horse slowly along the edge of his quiet ranch. The wind carried the smell of dry grass and dust. It was another long day of silence, just like every other since he came to live alone on this piece of land. Years ago he had friends, a family, even laughter. But life had taken them one by one, leaving only him, his horse, and the empty sound of wind. He didn't speak much to anyone in town. Folks said he was kind but distant, always ready to help but never willing to stay long. He lived far from trouble, far from noise, far from hearts that could break again. His home was small but clean. His fields stretched far, golden under the sun, and though his days were lonely, they were peaceful. Or so he thought until the morning he found her. It was a Sunday. The air was dry and still. Eli had ridden out early to check the fence near the old mining trail, where coyotes sometimes slipped through. He was fixing a post when he heard something strange. A sound carried softly through the wind. At first he thought it was an injured animal, but the sound came again, thin and weak, like someone calling for help. He pulled the reins, frowning, and turned his horse toward the noise. The trail led him to an old shed beside a broken windmill, half buried in weeds. It had been empty for years, a forgotten place no one ever went near. As he stepped closer, he saw something move inside the dark corner. His heart tightened. There, sitting on the cold ground, was a young woman. Her clothes were torn, her hair tangled, her eyes wide with fear. Eli stood still, his hat low over his eyes. He didn't speak at first. The woman flinched, shrinking back, whispering something he couldn't understand. Her wrists were marked, her ankles bruised, as if she had been tied for a long time. He felt a heaviness in his chest. Whoever she was, she didn't deserve this. He crouched slowly and spoke in a low, calm voice, the kind he used with frightened horses. "It's all right, ma'am," he said softly. "You're safe now." She shook her head, whispering no, her eyes darting like a cornered bird. He stayed where he was, showing her his hands, empty and gentle. After a long silence, she let him come closer. He found an old chain nearby, already rusted and weak. He didn't know who had done this, but he didn't ask. He only wanted to get her out. When she tried to stand, her legs trembled, and without a word, Eli lifted her into his arms. She was light as a whisper, too light for someone who had suffered so long. He placed her carefully on his horse, holding her steady all the way back to his ranch. She didn't speak during the ride. Her eyes stayed fixed on the horizon as if she feared it might vanish if she blinked. When they reached the small wooden house, Eli helped her down and led her inside. The fire was already burning in the hearth. He gave her water first, then a piece of bread, soft and warm. She ate slowly, like someone who didn't believe food would stay in her hands. Eli didn't ask her name that night. He didn't ask where she came from. He just showed her where the extra blanket was, pointed to the couch, and said quietly, "You can rest here. No one's gonna hurt you." For the first few days, she barely spoke. She stayed near the window, watching the open land with cautious eyes. At night, she slept in the barn instead of the house. Eli didn't stop her. He knew trust wasn't something you could demand. It had to grow on its own, like wildflowers after rain. Each morning, he left a plate of food near the barn door. Each evening, he made sure the fire burned warm in case she came inside. Slowly, she began to respond. When he said good morning, she gave a small nod. When he asked if she wanted tea, she whispered a quiet, "Thank you." One evening, as the wind carried the sound of coyotes far off in the hills, Eli noticed her standing at the fence line, staring at the sunset. He walked up slowly, holding 2 mugs of coffee. She took one with shaking hands. "You don't have to talk," he said softly. "Just know you're safe here." She looked up at him then, and for a moment he saw something break inside her eyes, fear giving way to something like hope. Days turned into weeks. The woman began to help around the ranch in small ways. She brushed the horses, swept the porch, and mended small things with careful hands. Eli watched quietly, never asking questions. She seemed surprised by kindness, as if she had forgotten what it felt like. One night, rain started to fall heavy. The roof echoed with thunder, and the wind howled across the plains. Eli was by the fire when she came inside, wrapped in a blanket, trembling. She stood by the doorway, unsure. He simply nodded to the chair by the fire. "Sit if you'd like," he said gently. She did. For a long time, neither spoke. The rain grew softer, the fire crackled low, and she finally whispered, "Why are you helping me?" Eli thought for a moment before answering. "Because someone should have," he said. His voice was rough, but kind, and because no one deserves to live scared. Tears rolled down her cheeks silently. She tried to speak, but only managed a soft sound. When she looked up again, she said the words he hadn't expected. "I had a name once," she whispered. "But I forgot it. They took it from me." Eli felt his throat tighten. He didn't know what kind of pain she had seen, but he understood loss, the kind that steals more than just a name. He nodded slowly. "You'll remember it when you're ready," he said. Days later, she began to speak a little more. She told him small pieces of her story, never the worst parts, only fragments. How she'd been taken from a distant town. How she'd tried to escape but was brought back. How one day they left her there and never returned. Eli didn't interrupt. He only listened. The land began to change with the season. Green crept back into the fields, and wildflowers grew along the fences. The woman started to walk freely around the ranch now, her steps steady and light. One morning, Eli found her humming softly while brushing the mare. It was the first sound of peace he'd heard from her. That evening, while they sat outside watching the horizon, she turned to him. The sun was low, the light warm on her face. "My name," she said quietly, "is Maria." Eli didn't speak at first. He just looked at her, the name hanging gently in the air. Then he smiled faintly, tipping his hat. "That's a good name," he said. She smiled too, the first real one he'd ever seen from her. The sky turned gold, the land glowed. And for the first time, Maria wasn't just a broken soul rescued from chains. She was someone finding her way back to herself. That night, as she stood outside the house barefoot in the grass, Eli watched from the porch. She looked up at the stars, her hair moving with the wind. He didn't go to her, didn't speak. He knew that freedom wasn't something a man could give. It was something a person had to remember they already owned. And as the moon rose over the quiet plains, Eli felt something in his heart shift. For years he had lived with silence and shadows. But now there was light again. A soft, human light that spoke of second chances. He didn't know what would come next, but he knew one thing for certain. The girl who had once been chained like an animal had finally remembered her name. The days on the ranch began to move slowly but peacefully. The long silence that once filled the air now carried small sounds of life. Maria's laughter, the soft whinny of horses, the rhythm of boots on wooden floors. Eli Turner still rose before sunrise every morning, but now when he stepped outside, he found a cup of coffee waiting on the porch. Maria made it for him quietly, leaving it there before tending to the horses. She said little, but every act of kindness spoke more than words ever could. Maria was learning how to live again. At first, she moved carefully, as if the world around her might disappear if she made a wrong step. But the open land slowly taught her that not all silence meant danger. She learned to saddle a horse, to mend a rope, to feed the cattle before dawn. The warmth of sunlight on her face and the wind brushing her hair began to feel like a new kind of freedom. Eli watched her from a distance, always respectful, always patient. He didn't see her as someone broken or weak. To him, she was strong, stronger than most people he had ever known. One evening, when she helped him repair the wooden fence, she stopped for a moment, her hands resting on the post. "It feels strange," she said softly, "to not be afraid all the time." Eli nodded and said, "That means you're healing." She smiled faintly and whispered, "Maybe I am." But the world outside the ranch was not as quiet as theirs. The small town nearby had started to notice the change. Folks had seen Eli with a woman on supply days, and whispers spread like dust in the wind. Some said she was a stranger hiding from trouble. Others wondered if Eli had finally found someone to fill his lonely house. The stories reached the sheriff, who decided to ride out and see for himself. It was a bright afternoon when he arrived. Maria was hanging laundry near the barn, the fabric blowing gently in the breeze. She froze when she saw the uniform, memories rushing back like a storm. Eli stepped out from the porch, his voice calm. "Afternoon, Sheriff." The man tipped his hat. "Heard you got company, Eli. Mind introducing me?" Eli walked forward slowly, placing himself between Maria and the stranger. "Her name's Maria," he said. "She's staying here. That's all there is to it." The sheriff looked at the woman for a long moment, then back at Eli. "Just making sure everything's all right," he said. "You know how folks talk?" Eli's eyes didn't waver. "They can talk all they want," he replied. "She's safe here." The sheriff nodded, though his curiosity remained. "All right then," he said finally. "You take care now." When he left, Maria's hands were shaking. Eli placed a hand gently on the fence beside her. "You don't have to be scared," he said quietly. "No one's taking you from here." That night, Maria couldn't sleep. She stood by the window, staring at the stars. When Eli walked by to check on the horses, she called his name softly. "Why do you keep helping me?" she asked. He looked up, his face calm in the lantern light. "Because I know what it's like to lose everything," he said. "And I figure kindness is all a man's really got left to give." From that night onward, something changed between them. It wasn't romance in the way people in town whispered about. It was something deeper. A quiet understanding, a shared peace born from two broken souls learning to breathe again. They didn't need to fill the silence. The silence itself became comfort. Maria began to go into town by herself sometimes. The first time Eli offered to go along, but she shook her head gently. "I need to do this alone," she said. When she returned hours later, dusty but smiling, she handed him a small sack of flour and a letter. "I found something," she said, her eyes bright. Inside the letter was a worn paper yellowed with age. It was a birth record, her own. Her full name was written in faded ink, Maria Estrella. She had tracked it down through the old church records. Eli looked at the paper for a long time before smiling softly. "Looks like you got it back," he said. Maria nodded, holding it close to her chest. "It feels real again," she whispered. "Like I exist." Over the next months, Maria grew stronger. She learned to ride across the fields with ease, her hair flowing in the wind. She began to sing softly while working, and sometimes Eli would stop whatever he was doing just to listen. Her voice carried across the land like sunlight through clouds. For the first time in years, Eli felt something warm and alive stirring inside him. He didn't speak of it, but the peace in his heart said enough. The ranch began to bloom in small ways. Maria planted flowers near the fence line, bright wild daisies and desert roses. She painted the old barn door blue, saying it made the place feel more alive. When the storms came, they faced them together, fixing roofs, calming animals, keeping the fire lit through long nights. Their quiet teamwork became its own kind of language, but not every day was easy. Some nights, Maria still woke from dreams she couldn't remember, her heart pounding in fear. Eli would leave a lantern burning outside her door, a small light to remind her she wasn't alone. One morning after such a night, she said softly, "You never ask about my past." Eli replied, "I don't need to. You're here now. That's enough." One afternoon, the sheriff returned, but this time it wasn't about rumors. He came to warn Eli that strangers had been seen near the trail, rough men looking for someone. Eli's jaw tightened, but his voice stayed calm. "They won't find her," he said. The sheriff nodded and left, trusting his word. That night, Maria asked if she should leave to keep him safe, but Eli shook his head. "You don't run from your life anymore," he said firmly. "You live it. The men never came. Maybe they never existed at all, just another ghost of her past fading into the wind." But something shifted that night. Maria realized that fear no longer ruled her. She stood taller, walked freer, and for the first time looked toward the future without trembling. As summer came, Eli and Maria rebuilt the old barn together. They worked side by side from dawn till dusk, covered in sawdust and laughter. When the last board was nailed, Maria stepped back and smiled. "Looks new again," she said. Eli nodded. "So do you." Later that evening, as the sun set in a blaze of gold, Maria took a small knife and carved something into the wooden gate of the ranch. Eli watched quietly. When she stepped back, he saw her name written there beside his, Maria Estrella Turner Ranch. She turned to him and said softly, "I'm not claiming what's yours." Eli, I'm just leaving a piece of me where I was reborn. Eli smiled, his eyes warm. You're part of this land now, he said. Always will be. That night the air was soft and still. The stars shone brighter than they had in years. Eli sat on the porch, his old guitar resting beside him. Maria joined him with 2 mugs of coffee, sitting quietly. They didn't speak much, but their silence was full of peace. The loneliness that had once ruled Eli's ranch was gone. The girl who had once been chained like an animal was now free, her spirit strong, her heart unbroken. And the cowboy who had lived too long in silence had finally found something worth staying alive for: hope, kindness, and the quiet beauty of redemption. As dawn broke over the plains, Maria stood at the gate, touching her name carved into the wood. Eli came to stand beside her, the morning light glowing on their faces. Neither said a word. The world stretched wide and endless before them, full of promise and new beginnings. And as the first rays of sunlight warmed the land, one truth became clear between them: sometimes freedom doesn't come from running away. It comes from finding someone who reminds you who you truly are.